progressed towards a time where the architect has become the brand and the focus is on the master architect. You know, we all look at these global master architects. Of course, there's a lot to learn.
There is a certain intrinsic essence to the nature of its being. It's completely visible that it is Khan, but it is not Khan, you know.
Doing it in a way that's responsible, doing it in a way that is contextual, that is sensitive, sustainable. These are all things that at some level are going to be determined by the people who are practicing.
If you would go to any part of the world, there is a certain stilo followed, a certain style followed by, as you said earlier, a star architect. Right? So that's going to be there. That's not going away.
What I feel is that branding can help on two levels. I mean, one is that it puts your work out there. You can meet a larger audience. You don't have to be limited to a certain set of people that you have worked with and then at their mercy and their referrals and their this and that.
Gaurav Premchandani from JOI-Design, Asha Sairam from Studio Lotus, Aparna Kaushik from Aparna Kaushik Design Group, Ravindra Kumar from Pragrup Architects. Now hand over the session to Tanya for further proceedings.
So I'm going to jump right in. I know there's a paucity of time and I'm not going to talk too much myself. I'll just quickly give some background to the reason why we're having this conversation today. So historically, Indian architecture and design have always been driven by the master craftsman, what is more commonly known as the star architect today. And as time progressed, architecture moved on to becoming more and more bespoke, as we call it, more personalized. The architect's brand became bigger, and the architect or the designer, of course, became less and less accessible, less and less available to the public. So what is perceived as architecture, obviously, in time got reduced to only a handful of landmark buildings that we see today. Now, city planning obviously claims to be, and truly is, very democratic at heart because it takes cognizance of the entire built environment. However, the need for the hour today is that good design, good architecture is truly accessible to everyone. It's not just a luxury that a few people can afford. So in order to create a very holistic built environment, this thought forms the premise of what we are discussing today. In a world that is overloaded, if I may say so myself, with media, PR, social media, awards, you name it, right? But is Indian architecture in that context ready to be democratized? My first question would be to Ravindra. We've progressed towards a time where the architect has become the brand and the focus is on the master architect. You know, we all look at these global master architects. Of course, there's a lot to learn. But in principle, are we not moving away from the idea of democratization?
I don't think so, because what you have actually defined is almost like an oxymoron. Because an architect, when he has to imagine or has to sort of compose the idea or the making of what he would want to perceive as part of the conversation that he gathers with a client or with any aspirational connect that has to become a building, there is a collective sort of ingrained in what he builds, primarily. You cannot sort of disconnect the persona to what he would build, because each practice or each perseverance has a certain direction or certain prioritization of what they would want to do. And that starts becoming visible in what becomes as the physiognomy, as the format of what he eventually builds. Democratization, in some way, is intrinsic to the nature of how you would arrive at. I mean, you take Khan's Indian Institute of Management, or even if you take Balakrishna V. Doshi's Indian Institute of Management, or like the 26-acre campus that I built in Bombay for Nirlon. You know, all this has a grain of inclusion. It's not exclusive. It's not like, you know, Sarabhai, just let him make a signature element. And there is the nature of the work being pretty versatile. It's not like you see every building of Khan looking like I am Ahmedabad. But there is a certain intrinsic essence to the nature of its being. It's completely visible that it is Khan, but it is not Khan. It is an inclusive environment of how he makes that building belong to the context and imbibes the nature. Of course, today's architecture, just 3 days back I saw a new posting by Norman Foster's office on a new airport that he's building in Saudi Arabia, which just looks like a souk. It's completely, deconstructing the idea of a technologically marvelous airport icon. And I think that is the nature of today's being of architecture, that it's gone into a very complex conundrum of many layers of inclusion, and that I think is beautiful. But it's not as visible as you would say that there is a certain amount of dictation that the client would deliver and the architect has to include. You look at that woman whose mother, she's the mother of the girl who got married in Tirupati. She's the wife of the priest, and she wore jewelry right from her, neck joint, chin bottom to her navel. It doesn't mean that all that you have you wear, right? So it's the same. A client tends to want to do everything in his or her realm. But I think through conversations and negotiations and strong optimism that an architect has to hold, he has to negotiate and deliver.
Thank you. That's a really good take on this. Thank you. Asha, we understand that good design is not a luxury for a limited few, right? In your experience as Studio Lotus, how do you think we can make design truly inclusive, accessible, and more available to the outside world, by not leaving out the cultural, the social, the economical layers that actually form the project itself? How do you think in a country as diverse as India, you make sure that design truly is accessible to all?
Okay. I think in some sense, this is something that's already happening. It's not, nobody can really sit and be a gatekeeper saying the democrat. Can you hear me? Okay. Oh. I think in a sense, this exercise of design democratization, it's already underway. No one can frankly pretend to be gatekeepers of this process. And in that sense, this idea of doing it in a way that's responsible, doing it in a way that is contextual, that is sensitive, sustainable, these are all things that at some level are going to be determined by the people who are practicing. Each of us who are practicing today have our own set of values that guide us, our own principles and philosophies in terms of how we design things. That those philosophies are not exclusively meant for the luxury consumer. It is very possible to adapt those to, say, pre-engineered, prefabricated homes that are adaptable to, say, different contexts of geographies. The other variant to this, I think, when you start thinking of anything at that scale, is economics, as you said, and really a function of demand and supply. I don't think there is a dearth of someone wanting a space or a home in India that is sustainable, that is rooted, that feels Indian, that is crafted, that's bespoke. But at some level, what used to stop us 15 years ago, 20 years ago was access to those materials, access to those craftsmen, access to their skill in a way that can actually be templatized and used repeatedly, which is why everything sort of looked cookie cutter. Now we don't have that problem. Now the industry has evolved. You can see it happening in fashion, you can see it happening in lifestyle, you can see it happening in home accessories, rugs, carpets, the brands that are now coming up, and they're all small, Indian, and coming from different parts of the country. So we today have a much larger palette to play with. And it's also starting to happen in architecture and architectural finishes. There are people in India who are working on designing modules of pre-engineered, prefabricated homes for Indian families, which can expand and contract depending on what your needs are. There are people who are selling cow dung plaster mixed in with gypsum, which you can use as a solution today on your walls. So all the knowledge exists and the solutions exist, and someone is packaging it and putting it out there for people to use. So I don't actually see there being a challenge. It's just the intention.
I'm glad you see it in practice. You know, that's usually the concern, and it's nice to see that from a practice perspective, you're seeing it happen organically. And actually, you've sort of set the ground for my next question, because my next question to Aparna was that accessibility is everything today, right? Access to information, access to data, knowledge, everything and anything is available for people through the touch of a screen. How accessible do you think is the world of design and architecture accessible to the aam aadmi, right? To the common man. Of course, if a client is choosing to make a building or a project, they come in informed with their own set of notions of Pinterest and this is what I want to do. But as inhabitants of the built environment, how accessible do you think is design to the common man? Is design a luxury to a selected few? And can it truly be made available, good design, can it be made available to all?
What I feel is that I think largely it has to do with also the economic growth that our country is seeing, that now by and large the so-called Aam Aadmi has started feeling to be more interested in design. Also with, chains like IKEA, like, when you see some of their products. And just the other day I was at a spa and I asked, this chair looks very nice, should have been from a very expensive product designer like a Philippe Stark or something, and it turned out to be from IKEA. And things like these, when these kind of good products, good designed products are available to the common man at an affordable price, it obviously also brings about a large awareness sort of within the common man about design, about aesthetics, about the built environment. Firstly, it gives them the choice to access that, So I think a lot of these brands, as we can see also, Indian brands are coming up with a lot of affordable products, I see, in terms of furniture, in terms of fabrics, in terms of many other things. Just the other day I found out about these group of people in Chennai doing vegetable printing on cotton fabrics, and I was shocked to know they were even displaying in exhibitions abroad. So these kind of collaborations with local craftsmen, artisans, also developing products which are affordable. So bringing them to the Aam Aadmi would definitely out a larger level of awareness also, which in terms helps, and it's like a cycle, So it really starts from the awareness of also the Aam Aadmi, and also with social media, all these e-commerce platforms, you're able to buy and access a lot of even international things at a very lower prices. So all these things are definitely going to make design a very democratized, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks. So, Gaurav, you run a practice that is truly global, right? What is your point of view in terms of accessibility and availability of architecture and design in the digital age? I mean, we have technology today, which has been a game changer. What is your take on it?
I hope I'm audible. Yeah, super. So I think my colleagues here have already touched the point, deeply about that. The data, the information is very much available and accessible. There is no doubt about it. But what we certainly lack is the emotion. By and large, design and architecture is a lot about the emotion, right? You cannot have a great design which lacks emotion in it. And something which is available through technology, cannot just be conveyed or be easily understood or easily be, accepted or, understood the depth of by the onlooker. So we need to provide, or we need to do a little more for that thing. And that Aparna just touched upon in her topic, when she said the collaboration with the artisans, right? We are living in a vast country. Right? You see the demography that we're living in, the geography. It's a huge country, right? So a collaboration will also lead to some more sustainability. So with the tech, a collaboration an approach where people can actually convey that emotion, work with people in the remote areas, would really bring out the, the character of democratization in the design.
Okay. Thank you. I think we all are sort of in consensus with the fact that this democratization is already happening and there's lots of information and data that is available, and it's an ongoing journey. Ravindra, I come back to you, and this is probably going to be my closing round of sort of comments. As architects, are we the only custodians of buildings, spaces, places, whatever we call it? How do we include other stakeholders, such as consultants, such as contractors, in this journey of, making content available? Is this responsibility of content and making it accessible to the outside world only lie with the architect? And do you think content is important in the first place?
Absolutely. I think it's very, very important. One cannot disconnect that necessity. But having said that, it's not that most creations are coming primarily by architects. You will realize that in today's market, there's a labyrinth of people with certain design ability who are able to, integrate what we can imagine is a beautiful composition. But inclusivity is very, very important in today's time. I think what was beautiful in the ages before, when you go to Jaisalmer or you go into Melukote in the south of India or around the edges of the Madurai Meenakshi temple, you will find a certain alignment of the kind of homes and houses and the architectural style that it incorporated, because culturally there was a consciousness of how you have to be responsible in what you build with another. And how do you reciprocate to the macro level, to the micro level, very consciously, because culturally, I think those guys were much, much more ingrained about being responsible than the way we are. Today, I think 70 or 80% of the population is just going to move into, cities. Even agriculture will be managed from cities eventually in the next 20 or 30 years. In such an onslaught, I think more than trying to term the word diversity, I think the whole society is going to disintegrate completely without a position of identity or cultural platform ethos. In such a situation, one has to be very careful in choosing what is right and what is wrong. And it needs a lot of practice. It's not like a young student who's just popped out of the college and has a certain ability, can claim that he has an idea to say what he wants or he doesn't want to say, do. But I think through rigorous practice, one will imbibe the craft of doing the accurate, the beautiful, the composition which is nice, which is inclusive. As you said, it has to understand complicated BIM models, it has to include complex services infrastructure. We do a lot of laboratories right now. We are building 4 million square feet for Siemens technology. It's completely technology driven. But having said that, it's also important that we understand the nature of it. Geometries of plan, like I'm building in Hosur right now, a plant which is going to be manufacturing cell phones, and they want to finish the building before August or March, April, the first plant, so that the next September they're able to launch the phones produced out of India. Now, there's a lot of engineering intelligence that comes into the forefront before I start drawing something on it. There is a lot of negation. Sometimes even they say, please get this Ravi out of the room because he's unnecessarily over creative. We don't want that, because we have to deliver, and there's a necessity of technology, and within that framework, we have to include innovation. So all that matters. But what is very important is for an architect to hold a position. Like Gautam Bhatia said, if some client comes and asks you to build everything in rabbit fur, will you be okay to kill 1 million rabbits to make that edifice happen? I think he wrote this almost 12 years ago in the Hindu and the Times of India. And it's spectacular. We don't want Punjabi Baroque. You don't want everything in rabbit fur. You don't want Paltrana Frau and Minotti all the time in your projects, right? You have to have that awakening, and only then you're an architect. Otherwise, you're just selling.
Very, very interesting. And that brings me actually to Asha's question. Are we in the first age of the Indian star architect? Is the personally branded star architect from India finally coming of age?
Oi.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I don't know if we're coming of age. I think I don't even know if this particular aspect of the practice should ever really come of age. I think there have been greats before us who have done tremendous work on whose shoulders we stand in practice. I think there are some great contemporaries also whom we have. What's interesting though today is that in order to be a brand, your brand can be in some sense almost independent of your practice. If you see the way that a lot of studios and a lot of practitioners use social media, and they use it very cleverly. I particularly love the way, say, Sairam does her content. And I think in the way in which she talks about a lot of aspects of design, she makes it easy for people who are even outside of the profession to understand. Yeah, it's truly accessible. If you are someone who's a homeowner looking to find the right kind of upholstery for your sofa, you don't necessarily have to go and consult an interior designer. You don't necessarily even have to blindly trust the person who's trying to sell you their merchandise. She is offering you advice free of cost, which just gives you a sense of what it is that you should look for. And that level of transparency and honesty has become a part of her brand. Which I think speaks volumes of the kind of work that she would like to do. So I think in that sense, the accessibility for people to be able to create their own sense of personal brand now because of platforms like Instagram and everything else has become a lot more. Do I think this is the peak of it? Absolutely not. Do I think it's the start of it? Definitely not. We're somewhere in the middle figuring it out.
I have one more question to add to
Please.
that. I mean, Studio Lotus is a collective as a brand,
Yes.
right? How do you sort of battle that bit between the individual star architect? Like you said, you know, you can have your own individual brand within a practice that is a collective.
So, okay, let me speak about it from my own perspective.
Yeah.
I'm the first person fighting it. My biggest arguments with pretty much anyone advising me on media is that I have a private social media account, and I have chosen to keep it that way because I feel like that's where insanity lies.
Yes.
But that's a personal choice. It's not a judgment on the people who are choosing to engage that. But at the same time, for us as a practice, it isn't about the individual. That to me, somewhere the most beautiful designs that I actually end up appreciating when I'm on juries and I'm looking at award entries, it's almost when you experience the absence of the designer, where the project almost feels like that is the most beautiful version of something that inherently belonged there. It completes the space, it doesn't take away from it. So with that sort of an approach for us, we're responding to the context, we're responding to the brief, we're solving for the client and we're solving for the user. The architect is, like anything else, a medium to be able to achieve that. And the designer is a medium to be able to achieve that. So it isn't really about our presence and our signature on a project and to have our name on the side of the building. So in the actual practice of it, the presence of the brand of the individual, I don't think is even relevant.
Yeah, I personally think that this move towards the collective as a brand is fabulous. I think it is doing wonders for Indian design at large. You know?
Yeah, and also in the process you realize that some of the ideas that you're getting they're not coming, it's not top down.
Yeah.
It's usually
really bottom
the
up.
enthusiastic intern who's just left college bursting with ideas with no real sense of how it can be built, who's coming in just throwing things at you, and sometimes some things just stick. And you take that and you run with it and you're like, okay, let me try and solve for how it can be built. But I think the idea, the seed of it is great. It doesn't have to come from this architect.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a great point. Thank you. Aparna, very quickly, I'll ask you. I know you're not feeling too well. Is brand visibility really giving designers a unique voice? She spoke about Sara. You know, everybody today is on social media. Instagram is one such platform. Of course, there are many others. There's YouTube and there's Pinterest and there's LinkedIn. How do you think it really helps in this branding of architects?
See, to me, what I feel is that branding can help on two levels. I mean, one is that it puts your work out there. You can meet a larger audience. You don't have to be limited to a certain set of people that you have worked with and then at their mercy and their referrals and their this and that. So you put your work out there, which is you know, to a very, very large audience, and they can decide for themselves. That is one. And number two, also it helps you connect with a lot of potential talent. To a lot of, you know, these young kids who are studying in colleges, who would come out, apply for internships. Like, we get a lot of internship applications now. And that's a great, great way of accessing or reaching out to this kind of audience. So it definitely helps, you know, that branding, so to speak, or the presence that you have online, in terms of, you know, reaching out to a larger audience when you are at large doing you know, your practice in terms of design, business and everything. So it does help.
Which is really democratization at
Absolutely.
a different level altogether. I think the fact that this opens up a whole world of avenues and opportunities to even talent, I think is
Absolutely,
fabulous.
and not only get limited working in your city with a few set of clients that refer to each other, you know, we're working pan-India, even abroad now. So it really broadens up your horizon in terms of reaching out to a much, much, much larger audience, for sure.
Thank you. My last question for today. Gaurav, today communications, brand building, PR, these are known devils that we all are sort of living with, we are confronted with. While traditionally Indian architecture and design was living in its silo of glory, right? With globalization, the client and the architect have access to a lot more. We all can choose to be very comfortable in our little silos, but in the larger context, how important is curation versus non-curation, right? When it comes to social media and putting your work out there.
See, if there is an architect or a designer who's working in a certain style, right, and you particularly call that to be a silo, right, so it's not only limited to India, it's everywhere, it's all around the world. If you would go to any part of the world, there is a certain silo followed, a certain style followed by, as you said earlier, a star architect, right? So that's going to be there, that's not going away, but that's now coming out. So that is making people much more passionate, much more serious about their work as to how to put forward. What are we putting forward? What are we doing? How are we going to look like? What are we displaying to the audience? What are my clients going to see? So of course, curation is very important. It is always, you know, it's putting people on the spot also at some times as to, you know, okay, am I doing right? Am I doing wrong? Is it going to attract my audience? It's going to deflect my audience? What's it going to do? So indeed, that factor is there, but the silo is not going away. It's still staying there. It's still going to, everybody has their own style, and what we are talking about is bringing out those styles, making it accessible for everybody. So that is definitely slow, steady, happening, will keep happening, but yes, curation is important for the architects and designers to bring forward as much as they can.
Thank you so much.